The latest on Yellowstone Volcano from Mike Poland, the geologist in charge of the supervolcano. USGS reveals Caldera deformation amid the overdue eruption claims. Callum Hoare Express UK reports the Yellowstone supervolcano scientists revealed caldera deformation that occurred over the last year in the midst of claims of some kind of a super eruption being overdue. When they're talking about an eruption, they always talk about a super eruption. The Yellowstone caldera, which is the first ever U.S. national park, gets the nickname of a supervolcano because it's able to inflict devastation on a global level in the event of a super eruption. It's spread over the northwest area of Wyoming into Montana and Idaho, and constantly being monitored by USGS, the United States Geological Survey, in case of a sign of super eruption. This only happened 3 times in recent history: 2.1 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and 640,000 years ago. Those were the super eruptions. So some claim that a massive eruption is overdue. It has had a major eruption 70,000 years ago, and another 80 eruptions since then. One of them was about 5,300 years ago, a hydrothermal eruption that created the area of Mary Lake. That explosion created a lake. Now, self-proclaimed experts on Yellowstone conclude by calculating differences in time between each of these events, and they claim that it's 40,000 years overdue. Again, we're talking about super eruptions. The USGS scientist in charge at Yellowstone, Mike Poland, revealed details of what happened over the past year in Yellowstone. He said earlier this month, during the month of November, University of Utah seismograph stations, which is responsible for operating the maintenance of Yellowstone seismic network, located 107 earthquakes in the Yellowstone region. Now, a lot of these earthquakes are outside of the quakes that are outside of the park boundary, they usually don't include, even though they are part of the supervolcano. He goes on to say the largest was magnitude 3.1, occurring outside the park, just west of Hebgen Lake. Hebgen Lake is where we had the 7.3, 7.5 magnitude earthquake, August 17, 1959, which created a landslide, and also a lake called Quake Lake. Now, there was also a very small swarm, he said, of earthquakes last month that began right at the end of November and continued into early December on the west of the park. The largest event of the sequence was at magnitude 2.1. And he's always talking about what happened up to the beginning of December, of course. He's not talking about what happened during December. That'll come out in the beginning of January as a report. Dr. Poland went on to discuss the deformation record. He said the GPS deformation over the past 2 years on the Sour Creek Resurgent Element Station at White Lake. Down in this case, downward trends means subsidence and upward means uplift. So over the past 2 years, there was an overall downward trend suggesting subsidence of the resurgent dome. But there's been some variability here in the last few months caused by storms. He also discussed other areas in the caldera. He says moving to the Mallard Lake Dome and the Old Faithful site, we see the same downward trend over time. Over the 2 years of this plot, some variations in the last few months again, subsidence with a little bit of variability. He says if we move to the Norris Geyser Basin, we can see that there was an upward trend, so there had been uplift from 2015 all the way to October 2018. Now, Norris Geyser Basin is where we have the Steamboat Geyser, the biggest geyser in the world, and that has basically since last March of 2018, has been erupting just about every week. He goes on to say concerning Norris Geyser, it has then stayed mostly steady with no up or down motion of any consequence until about September 2019. That's when a small subsidence event occurred about 2 centimeters. Then over the past month or so, we've again been pretty steady. Now, another USGS geologist, Jake Lowenstein, Stern, I think it's Stern, I made a mistake here, previously rubbished claims concerning the supervolcano being overdue for a super eruption. He told, in his 2014 seminar, he said when you see people claiming it's overdue, usually the numbers they come up with say the last eruption was 640,000 years ago, but it erupts every 600 years. But in fact, if you average the eruption intervals, 2.1 million, 1.3 million, and then 640,000 years ago, if you average those numbers, you come up with something that's over 700,000 years. So that means that in reality, if you tried to make that argument, you would not be overdue for another 70,000 years. Lowenstern went on to state even this calculation is questionable. He said the other thing that's important to realize is that when they do statistics based on two eruptive intervals, they're usually just playing games because we don't know. There's no clock down there. The magma is going to erupt when it wants to erupt. There's been a lot of things that have happened over the last 600,000 years that might indicate there's less likely of a chance of an eruption. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.